In terms of clarifying hubs, workspaces, and so on, let me just offer my own sort of view. It's also about the distinction between incubation as a process and incubators as a place. One of them has walls, the other is a process. On the spectrum, where are different types of incubators and hubs along a spectrum? At one end you could have no support, and at the other end you could have lots of support. All right, and co-working spaces are near the no support end. They may do some sort of facilitation so that people are introduced to each other. That's what in the hub, that's what the host does. At the other end you have, both in technology and I think in social innovation, you have incubation where someone has a specific idea and is part of a program which helps them take that idea from the kitchen table to being a realized project.
I think the hub network itself is a diverse network, and you have some hubs that maybe on the one side are just places where people work, exciting, wonderful, amazing places where people work. I think you are seeing in some hubs, some of the more successful or in larger cities or more mature hubs, increasing investment in some of that incubation type activities.
I guess where I've ended up, to the extent I've ended up anywhere, I think there's clearly some space for the very traditional model of incubator, which is essentially a building-based project where you provide space for people, maybe a bit of support, but not much else, and that's fine. It's probably every city should have a few, but they're not very exciting to me. Much more interesting, I think, are the models where an incubator is animated by a very clear purpose, which usually means a small number of individuals who have a sense of what they're trying to change, what they're trying to achieve. We've seen a lot of incubators in the UK and other countries in Europe which thought that if you just put people in one building together, sort of some natural chemistry will lead to creative interaction and new ideas will flow and so on. That was often the promise of them, and it almost never happened. Really? Or rather, it only happened if that was really intensively designed and shaped. I'm also interested in the model which we did at the Young Foundation and Denikin and others, which is much more problem-solving incubation, where you start in some ways with what is the need and much more consciously assemble the different elements to create more radical and more profound solutions, rather than just essentially SME or social enterprise or social entrepreneur incubation. I mean, what we're interested in the UK, for example, is new kinds of incubators around specific fields like health or education. I've been quite impressed with things like the Mars project in Toronto, which is an incubator linking a university, a hospital, and technology, but very focused again on health innovation. It's those sort of models, I suspect, may achieve more than very generic hub incubators.
For us, the physical space is not very important at all. We are an incubator and we're also a hub, almost by accident because we have a building. But the most important thing is the expertise that you're able to bring to bear, and sometimes some money to help a social venture get off the ground. And we look for the most high potential social ventures to support. And normally they're not very close to us. They could be anywhere in the country. So we don't want them to move to our space because that would limit us severely in who we supported. Not many of them actually want to move to East London.
At Taxi, we do a lot of virtual incubation. We do a lot of venture support for ventures that are around the country. And so I think having some thoughts about how you do incubation or you do venture support that's kind of independent of a physical location is really quite important. So what is it about the process of incubation that needs to happen? And we look at things like business strategy, things like knowledge and relational capital, who you know, what you know, is really, really important, as well as thinking about how you measure for impact. And also some of the basics of sustainability. Sort of how do you keep these organisations going and sort of funding themselves?
I think there are some spaces that will always just be places to work, because that in itself is a great and wonderful thing. But increasingly, a number of us are trying to kind of scratching our heads and looking and saying, like, look at this amazing thing we're sitting on top of. how do we go deeper with our practice? How do we really translate this into impact? And so I think of us as a combination of a co-working space, a shared workspace, a community center, an event space, and an incubator as well. And there's something to be said for physically co-locating people and the magic that can happen there. But it's the layer of programming that's then the really enticing and challenging and interesting part.
So what does that Social Innovation Park do?
Well, it's an infrastructure to design and implement large-scale social innovation projects, and it is very focused on that concept of large scale, because we think that there are a lot of really good incubators focusing more on individual entrepreneurship, but there are not resources for really design social innovation projects. So what we do is we try to create the collaboration with different resources that are doing their own thing, but at the same time are providing resources to the park and to the projects that we are launching at the park. So it's more a constellation of resources rather than a physical space. But we also have a physical space because social innovation also needs to be tangible, needs to be touched, and people need to identify. So sometimes we use the example of the Silicon Valley, and we say that we want to create a social Silicon Valley, because I think most of us don't really know what they do at the Silicon Valley, but we know exist, and we know there are a lot of very intelligent people, really interesting projects out there. So it is real. You can visualize.
Governments themselves, and not just in the US, but in many parts of Europe as well, are struggling with budget deficits. They are struggling with institutions, programs, and policy approaches that met our needs in the 20th century and no longer meet our needs as our populations change, as our demographics change. And I think one of the fundamental issues that we're facing right now is that, this fills me with hope, but it also creates a huge amount of challenges, is that for the first time in human history, we are connected globally at a mass scale. And this means that the things we used to do through institutions and could only do through institutions, we can now do outside of institutions because we can organize outside of institutions. So this is fundamental. This is just a game changer. And so governments need to play here. They need to learn from people who are successfully solving problems outside of traditional institutions. They need to sort of partner in new ways with the private sector, with civic innovators, and they're doing it.